Thanks, Abel. Can you hear me okay? Okay. So I wanted to thank Abel and Lisa for this invitation, and I especially wanted to thank Lisa for providing me with reading glasses, which I left at home for the first time ever today, which is only kind of funny because, as will be obvious from my introduction, I am a comparative or a total outsider here. I know nothing about data science. My friends think it's the funniest thing in the world. Someone asked me last night if Data Science Day was a national holiday. And I said that I feel like one of those people who goes to a very, very far away country and it's the national holiday of the country. And there's parades and marching bands. And you're kind of getting into it, but you're thinking, I wonder what we're celebrating. So that's the reason that I'm here is because a couple of years ago I was asked to start a teaching center here on campus, the Center for Innovations in Teaching and Learning. And at kind of just the moment that the center started, what I think of as this historical dam that had existed between students and faculty, other than in actual instructional contexts, started to break apart, and now a kind of tsunami of student data is coming towards instructors with no preparation whatsoever. And so I am extremely interested in what it means for us that we are going to have institutional data about students, including their educational history, disability status, mental health, SAT scores, scores in prior coursework, and known risk factors. So all these things are becoming available to us. And just to give you an example, I got an email this morning from the company that built the dashboards for our Student Success Division that says the following: expand well-being initiatives with faculty partnerships. So this is aimed at student affairs professionals. Progressive campuses have gone beyond student affairs to integrate skills of crisis management and resilience into the classroom curriculum and other academic settings. And so my question is, how exactly is that happening? And it really dovetails nicely with Angus's questions about the user end. Okay, so it's what we would call in my field reception. How are we, if we are at all, thinking about reception? So I'll start with a story. I'm sure you all know about digital footprint tracking devices. They were used on campuses initially to figure out things like how many people are in the dining hall at 7 a.m. versus 8 a.m. and how many people are in the library at 11 p.m. Do we need to stay open till midnight? Then the technology advanced a little bit using the Wi-Fi to figure out, okay, we built a silent room with computer terminals in it, but it turns out that 85% of the students using the silent room are using their own laptops to do their work. So maybe we don't need to direct resources to buying laptops, right? We could direct resources somewhere else. But now it's gotten a lot more interesting than that. There's a company called Degree Analysis that is tracking through the Wi-Fi what kind of internet students are using at any given moment. Okay, so not only where they are, but what kind of internet use is there. And even though on most campuses that data is being aggregated, there are people who are saying things like the following. If little Bobby is getting a C+ in Chem 1A and it's 8:01 a.m. and little Bobby is in the coffee shop across town, okay, maybe little Bobby needs a text message that says, hey, little Bobby, you're late for chemistry class. Okay, so that's one option. And I want to say about that we happen to know that if that text message comes from or appears to come from the professor, that makes a big difference to little Bobby. He's much more likely to hustle across town if it comes from the faculty member teaching the course. Okay, then we have Mahan, who spends 4 hours a day studying in McHenry Library, except that for 3 hours and 45 minutes, Mahan is watching YouTube. Okay? Again, she could get a text message from an advisor, and this is already happening in some places, but she could also have an interaction with her instructor where her instructor seamlessly talks about study skills in the course of presenting the class curriculum. Okay, so these are the instances that I would like to talk about and ask you to think about with me a little bit today. So a year ago, a much-cited piece came out in the higher education press called Setting the Table: Responsible Use of Student Data in Higher Ed. It was a combined project of Martin Kurzweil, who started Ithaca S&R, which is a higher ed consulting and research and edutech firm, and Mitchell Stevens of Stanford's Center for Advanced Research through Online Learning. And they laid out 4 first principles to guide responsible use of student data. And this is the 4th principle. Awareness of educational practices that are suboptimal and of available ways to improve those practices requires educators to proactively change what they do. Okay. So this is a pretty high bar, right? And it's also, a little bit suspect to a lot of people in the professional development field because it comes out of what some might see as a bastion of monetization, capitalization, and neoliberal incursion into higher ed, Ithaca S&R. Okay. Be responsible, buy more stuff would be one way to talk about that. Indeed, the second of the four first principles is education is only partially a business activity. But here's the thing. I recently attended a kind of boot camp of educational equity at USC, led by a real pioneer in that field called Estela Ben-Simon. And what's interesting to me is that Estela Ben-Simon could have said this sentence too. So the educational equity warriors of the left and the ed tech neoliberal financial incursions into higher ed people of the right speak the same language about the possibilities opened up to us through data analytics. And that's what I'm interested in, okay? That's what's really driving my interest in this. So at that boot camp, we were challenged to have a kind of institutional zero tolerance policy for equity gaps measured by traditional demographics such as race and gender, okay? So the ethical imperative to use research and data on learning to close equity gaps is embraced as much by higher ed's equity warriors as it is by those who want to use business to make public higher education as profitable as possible for private sector, ed tech, consulting, and other public-private partnerships. So my question right now, although there are lots of questions that we could talk about here, is who are these educators? And how are they being included in this conversation? Okay. When I think of educators in that sentence, and I'll go back to the previous slide, okay, it requires educators to proactively change what they do. I think they're thinking primarily about instructors, okay, in addition to all the para-instructional support in advising and such. So to what extent, I want to ask, is institutional responsibility for ensuring student success being seamlessly shifted onto individual instructors, and how are instructors being prepared for this brave new world of student data coming at them? What am I supposed to do with a dashboard sent to me at the start of the quarter that gives me information about the students in my class? What pedagogical practices am I required to adopt if my class is 62% first generation college students, but what about if 40% of my students have a known history of extreme stress or suicidation and I'm given that information? How and when am I supposed to become educated about these matters? Okay, so Alana Zaida at UCLA has this technology is being adapted without much thoughtfulness or much education on the part of the people using the tools, and she has this wonderful visualization how ed tech shapes pedagogy and policy and vice versa. And there's the machine with the inputs and the outputs and the student kind of flying around in the middle. But I think these people over here who are looking terrified are the faculty, okay? So who will take on the job of educating instructors, not just about how to read the information they are being given, but more importantly, what to do with it? We currently lack a small army of support staff. We have 2.5 people working in the teaching center on campus, for instance, to make this data really useful to an instructor. Okay. I think I just hit escape, right? Sorry. Okay, awesome. At the other end of the chain, if I get a bubble chart telling me there's a differential outcome for students from different demographic groups in my course from last spring, since the institutional data system has noticed I am teaching it again this spring, what am I supposed to do in response to those bubble charts that tell me I have demographic differences? And to what extent am I, as an individual instructor, to be held responsible for closing those gaps, understanding that institutions love to shift responsibility for structural problems onto individual actors? We do it all the time as faculty when we say our students are not prepared. Okay, so we engage in that practice, and we are about to become subject to that practice in really interesting ways. So what does a good kind of accountability for equity look like, and when is such accountability a pernicious evasion of institutional responsibility and a kind of free market free-for-all for ed tech, and how will we know the difference? Okay. In conclusion, okay, I will say we have a set of principles that have been developed on this campus for the responsible use of data, now that we have, of student data. So from the student's perspective, now that their cell phones are basically ankle trackers, okay, Kurzweil and his collaborators have this great line where they say, in 1974, FERPA came out and it serves the digital present about as well as a bicycle serves a kangaroo. And what I would like to say is that faculty governance serves the digital present about as well as a bicycle serves a kangaroo. So we don't have an analogous notion about how these changes are going to affect faculty. Okay, so I tried to draw up just some things that we might think of as principles for responsible use of learning analytics and data as they affect faculty. Transparency, workload consciousness, right? The dean of BSOE said to me yesterday, these questions are not a priority for our faculty. And I was like, well, what about if they become a priority for your faculty because they are used in the academic personnel process? They're going to become a priority very quickly when we see those kinds of changes. And as I say, I don't think anybody's minding the store on this one. Where are we going to get support for data interpretation and action? Right? Where are we going to get classroom level data privacy and security, clarity around shared responsibility for learning, and in my case, professional development for data literacy, pedagogy, and course design? So for those of you who are faculty or staff members, I'm initiating a project next year called the Data Fellows through the Center for Innovations in Teaching and Learning, and these are the questions that we're going to take up. So you can ask me about that if you'd like to know more. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jody.